Good morning, and thank you for being here. Today's conversation is a part of a special project whose goal is not just to talk about markets, forecasts, and numbers, but to go deeper to understand the minds behind them. So, a bit of a background about yourself. Professor Roubini is a world-renowned economist who's best known for predicting the 2008 global financial crisis. Born in Istanbul to Iranian Jewish parents and raised in Tehran, Tel Aviv, and Milan, he completed his undergraduate studies at Bocconi University and later earned a PhD in economics at Harvard University under Jeffrey Sachs. He has taught at Yale and New York University, served as a senior advisor to the U.S. Treasury in the White House, and founded Roubini Global Economics, fluent in 5 languages, and the author of multiple influential books, including Crisis Economics and Megathreats. Professor Roubini is one of the most influential voices in global macroeconomics today. So my first question for you today, Professor Roubini, is more personal. And as I stated before, you were born in Istanbul and raised in Tel Aviv and Milan. And later you spent most of your professional career living in New York. With such a rich and diverse background, where do you believe the word home truly resonates for you today?
Well, a pleasure being with you today. Thank you. I travel more than half of my time. I was away for the last 7 weeks in the 4 continents. So, my home right now is New York City. That's my only home. But I spend less than half of my time in New York. I go to Europe, I go to Middle East, I go to Asia, I go to Latin America.
Yeah.
So home is New York, but I must say one of my nicknames is Global Nomad because my field is global macroeconomics. And to understand the world, you have to go all over the world, from US to Europe, China, India, Japan, Latin America, even Sub-Saharan Africa. So I feel at home in most places. If I go and visit a country, I enjoy it. It's always interesting to see new people, new language, new culture, new food, new art, new minds. So home is wherever I am, but my real home is New York City.
And do you enjoy traveling?
I do enjoy it. It's a bit too much, probably.
Yeah.
I turned 67 a month ago. So, at my age, traveling this much takes a toll on your body. I should travel less, but times are interesting. There's so much happening. And to understand the world, you cannot be sitting in New York in front of a terminal and looking at the numbers. You have to go to countries, meet policymakers, academics, journalists, intellectual, financial sector folks, corporate ones, until you get a sense of what's going on in a country, in the world, and connecting the dots. So, I enjoy it, but probably I travel a little bit more than I should.
Yeah, traveling is extremely important, but yeah, it can be too much sometimes. So moving on from personal to more academic, when did you realize that economics was your true passion and what you wanted to pursue? And was there any other jobs or careers that appealed to you, whether creative or scientific, throughout your life?
I don't know. I was lucky because I think that by the age of 16, when I was in high school, I knew that I wanted to study economics, and not just economics, macroeconomics, and not just macroeconomics, but international macroeconomics. I was born in Istanbul, then we moved to Tehran, Tel Aviv, Milano, and I would travel when I was a teen all over Europe, Israel, and all over the world. So I was always curious about the world, and I discovered economics, and I figured out I wanted to change the world for the better. I was a bit politically and socially active at that time, and maybe I was not smart enough for the hard sciences, and the other social sciences like sociology or political science were a bit too soft. So economics was more rigorous formally, and with economics, you can understand the world, and through economic policy, you can change the world. So I knew I wanted to become an academic, but I didn't want to be just an ivory tower academic. I wanted to get involved into empirical issues, into policy, into changing the world for the better. So, but I'm lucky. Most people, even after college, don't even know what they want to do.
Yeah.
Well, I knew at 16 I'll be a global macroeconomist, and about 50 years later, 51 years later, I'm still doing the same. But
Yeah,
I'm an exception, I would say, rather than the rule.
definitely. Knowing what you want to do at 16 is very impressive. And most people don't even know what they want to do after college. So that's,
Or they don't even know what's will be their major in college, literally.
yeah,
So, but I knew it all along. So, but I would say I'm an exception.
yes, definitely. So throughout your studies, how did your experiences at Bocconi and Harvard University shape not only the person you are today, but the choices you took throughout your career? And do you think those years are more for building connections and relationships or for academic growth?
Well, going to good schools is important. Certainly, Bocconi, Milano was the top economics program in Italy and was training people to go to grad school in good schools in US or UK. I got lucky. I ended up at Harvard. That was one of the top five economics program for PhD studies. So, being in the right schools is important, of course. And of course, I met while in college and then in grad school people, and I'm still friends. But I would say when you do a PhD, your academic studies are more important than the connections you make. If you go and do an MBA, you meet people probably going to be friends and colleagues for life, and you create a business network, and people 30 years later help each other to start a business or do a new venture. In academia is different. You become an academic. Academic work is more solitary. You write papers or books on your own. At most, you have a co-author. So, you create a network, but I would say the network aspect of connecting with people in a PhD program is less important than being in a good school, working hard, studying hard, and trying to learn as much as you can and do intelligent and path-breaking research. You have to focus on that rather than schmoozing or networking with people.
Yeah. So after your studies, you've navigated across multiple worlds from academia to government to entrepreneurship, from advising the US Treasury to founding Roubini Global Economics to becoming a professor at NYU and at Yale. Which job did you find the most fulfilling, and what inspired you to transition from such distinct environments? Because as I mentioned, you went from academia, government, entrepreneurship. So what inspired you to make those transitions?
At different stages in life, different occupations, you find them more satisfactory. When you're early in your career, you want to become a tenure professor. You have to be focused on academic research, theoretical or empirical. The saying is publish or perish. Unless you publish papers that are quite arcane, you're not going to get tenure. And in academia, the paper get rewarded are those who have less words and more math equations and Greek letters. Literally, formal models are rewarded more than empirical or applied stuff. But then, after you have published, academic papers give you tenure. Even a top paper in a top journal, high quality paper by yours, my seminal papers, maybe 1,000 people might have read it. While today I write a column for Project Syndicate. It's a global syndication of op-eds. They translate in 20 languages. They publish it in over 100 magazine, newspapers, in print, online. So my typical column has a potential readership of probably 200 million people. So, when you're in your 20s, you want to get tenure, having your peer, those 500 geeks and nerds like you reading your paper and respecting it is of greater satisfaction. When you are in your 50s or 60s and you want to change the world, you want to change the minds and views of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. So your interests become different. So academia was great, gave me the solid basis for understanding in a rigorous way the world. I always knew that I didn't want just to be an ivory tower economist. I wanted to change the world. I didn't know, but I knew at some point I'd get involved into policy. Even when I was in grad school, I would go to Washington for summer internships at the IMF. And then when I was an assistant professor, again, internships at the IMF, at the World Bank, at the Federal Reserve, Bank of Israel. So I knew at some point in time I'll get involved into policy. And that happened only between 98 and 2000, well after I got tenure. So being in government and working to change the world for the better is also highly rewarding. And even if I'm not a policymaker now, I talk to policymakers wherever I go. If I go to a country, I meet the governor of the central bank, the finance minister, the economic advisor of a prime minister or president, whoever is the heads of state. So I give indirect policy advice. And also, you know, I have now economic consultancies that gives advice to asset managers like hedge funds and others. And I'm also increasingly involved myself in 2 or 3 different ventures where you don't only write about money, but then you're directly involved into making investment decisions. So I would say over a life cycle, everything is interesting. The common thread is all about global macro, understanding economics, understanding policy, understanding markets, and all of these things have been of great satisfaction for me. And at different points in time, different things are more important. Today, writing a paper for an audience of 500 academics is not important anymore. And therefore, I stopped writing those types of academic high theory papers that very few read. But 40 years ago, it was important.
Yeah. So yeah, throughout your life, you've authored several books, including From Crisis Economics to Megathreats. Which of your books do you think was the most difficult to write, and which represents your vision and your voice most accurately today?
Yeah, I've written, first of all, a few more academic books, while the 2 that you cited, Crisis Economics and Mega Threats, are more what people call trade books, written for an intelligent, broad audience. You don't need to be an economist.
Yeah.
New York Times or Times of London or Financial Times or some Washington Post or whatever, high quality newspaper, and you have a basic knowledge of economics, you can understand it. So therefore, broader audience beyond the academic, beyond even the policy or the market one. You know, both of those 2 trade books are important for me. One, because it was written after the global financial crisis, Crisis Economics, and was why it happened, and not just why it happened, but put it in historical context of centuries of financial crisis. But probably my last book is maybe my more important one. You know, it was challenging because I wrote it during COVID. I couldn't travel. Maybe because of that, it was easier to sit down and think about stuff. It's more ambitious because, you know, economists believe in the concept of comparative advantage. It means stick to your precise field and don't think or read or write about stuff you don't know. So your narrow field, in my case, global macro. You know, during COVID and even before, I realized that in addition to economic, monetary, and financial risks, there are also, in this complicated world, social, political, geopolitical, security, environmental, health, think about COVID, technological, demographic, and other factors. And they're all integrated together. That's why the book Mega Threats is titled 10 Dangerous Trends That Imperil Our Future and How to Survive Them. And not all of them are economic. So, you know, it was good that I had time to think and read and write, because I was stuck in New York. But there's a chapter on artificial intelligence, the chapter on global climate change, the chapter is about socio-political instability and why we have a rise of extreme right-wing populist parties that are against liberal democracy. I discuss demographic issues and so on and so on. So it's not just about economics, but also the interplay between economics, politics, geopolitics, science, technology, and you name it. So it took me a while to understand stuff that I was not an expert. But for all of them, I took the economic angle. So what are the economic implications of artificial intelligence for jobs, or what are going to be the economic implication of climate change or global pandemics, and so on and so on, or what are the economic triggers of this backlash against liberal democracy, and what are the consequences of this backlash in terms of economic policies. So I take a little more of the economics angle of it, but I had to go beyond my traditional expertise and learn about lots of other stuff. But the good news is that I had plenty of time to sit stuck in New York for a year and a half and think about other things beyond my narrow field. So it was the most challenging book, but probably also the most rewarding, because it's a big picture. It's not just about economic and financial issues like crisis economics. It's really about how the world is going to evolve in the next 10, 20, 30, 50 years. It's a bit ambitious, but I think I did a good job.
Definitely. Do you think since you've published and written the book, have your views changed at all since we've advanced in technology, etc., and AI?
Many of the things in the book were confirmed. I was worried about fragmentation and deglobalization, about high debts, the return of inflation, stagflation, about geopolitical backlash against liberal democracy and populism, about restriction to migration, and about the implication of climate change. And in the paperback edition that came out late in 2023, I added a chapter asking myself, compared to a year before, whether those mega threats had gotten better or worse, and they'd gotten mostly worse. Now, the book was mostly about the things can go wrong. There were two chapters that were more positive. One about AI and how AI can increase economic welfare, growth, productivity growth. And two, there was a dystopian scenario when everything goes wrong chapter. There was a utopian one. And the utopian one starts with AI increasing productivity, increasing economic growth, resolving problems of climate change and other social political issues, and getting us in a better place. And recently, actually, people usually think of me as Dr. Doom, but I've been actually optimistic that while these mega threats over the next decade are still important, look, everything that Trump is doing right now is the kind of things I was writing in my book later in 2022. But then the optimistic side is I do believe that technological progress, and it's not just AI, machine learning, robotic, automation, biomedical research, semiconductors, space exploration, exploitation, fintech, agtech, green tech, quantum computing, fusion, new material science, about a dozen industries of the future that are related to AI and are going to lead to a secular boom. So we're going from a secular stagflation to a secular boom. And countries like US are going to be highly innovative in technology, are going to grow very fast. And therefore, I've taken a slightly more optimistic view that if we can resolve these mega threats after the storm, there'll be clear skies and there could be a better future. Of course, AI can lead to more inequality, to job displacement. But if you're growing 4 or 5% rather than 2, having joblessness is a good problem to have, because you can always tax the rich and the winners and redistribute to everybody else universal basic income and things of that sort, and make everybody better off. So it's growing 5% and having high inequality unemployment is a good problem to have, while growing like Europe 1% and being stuck there creates social political problems that are more severe. So I'm relatively now optimistic that in spite of Trump, US is going to come ahead. As I said recently, tech, Trump's tariffs, tech trumps Trump too. American exceptionalism is going to remain with us because I think AI is going to make the US the dominant economic power still of our century. I don't think that American exceptionalism is over, even if Trump is trying hard to do that. But as I said recently, doesn't matter who's president of the United States, it could be Trump, Kamala Harris, Bernie Sanders, or Mickey Mouse. Even if Mickey Mouse was president of the United States, the dynamism of the US private sector innovations are such that we're going to be at 4% growth compared to the 2% of recent past by the end of this decade. And 4% growth is going to become 6% growth 10 years later. So it doesn't matter. We're going to survive Trump and do well in spite of him. Tech trumps Trump, tech trumps tariffs, traders Trump. So all these things are noise. The underlying powerful forces is technology, and how technology is going to improve the world for the better.
Yeah, what's been happening recently has been very shocking and very effective. But as you said, you have to be optimistic for the future. So moving on to a topic that has obviously had a huge impact on your life when you became globally recognized for predicting the 2008 financial crisis. Since then, do you think we've come close to an event of similar magnitude, or do you believe that what happened in 2008 was the defining economic crisis of our generation?
Well, it was the most severe economic crisis of our generation, but you never know. Another one may come. And in my book, Mega Threats, I said that the crisis may be triggered not only by economic and financial vulnerabilities, but also by social political backlash against liberal democracy, a geopolitical depression that leads to cold wars that can become hot war between great powers. Climate change is a time bomb. As we saw, COVID was an ugly pandemic, and unfortunately, for lots of reasons, not going to be the last one or the most virulent one. So there are lots of ugly things can happen in the world that can lead not only to economic financial crisis, but to natural disaster, to a nuclear winter, to severe economic, social, political, and geopolitical displacements. Those are the risks. So stuff worse than a global financial crisis could occur. But as I said, recently I've taken the view that technology is a positive force and can even help us to resolve many of these underlying problems, starting with climate change, starting with pandemic, if you use it the right way. So I've become more optimistic that maybe we're not going to get an apocalypse or at the end of the world. But we could still have other financial crises, and bad things can still happen. And this Trump shock is pretty ugly in terms of its consequences, but it's not going to lead to a global recession like the GFC.
Yeah. I mean, it's very scary. It can do many things, and we don't know how to control it. We have to find a way to benefit out of it without it gaining too much control over us. But anyways, now, Professor Roubini, I'd like to know some advice that you have to young minds, such as myself, who's starting this journey. I'm 15 years old and I'm passionate about pursuing a career in economics and business. What do you believe matters most for the next upcoming years for me, whether it's knowledge, curiosity, mentorship, or connections, or something else entirely?
I believe that knowledge and curiosity is more important than mentorships and connections. You have to learn and be really good. And of course, people tell me, given the disruption of technology, how do I choose a major and then a career so I'm not going to be obsolete and replaced by the robots? So, to me, it's a combination. You'll say the young person, a young man or woman who's going to college or even starting doing some elective studies in high school. First of all, you have to know some science and technology, say a major in some STEM related topic, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, computer science is useful. It doesn't mean that you have to learn how to code, and soon enough the AI is going to code the code. But you have to understand how technology is going to affect every job, every business, every entrepreneurial activity. So even if you don't know how to code, you have to be aware of it. Majoring might be one way of doing it. Two, you have to know how to critically still think, read and write. So having a minor in something more, to say, liberal arts, whether it's literature or philosophy or some other more liberal arts education, I think is useful because nobody is going to be like me, lucky enough to 16 knowing that you have that job and 50 years later having exactly the same job. Then people in your generation will have to change jobs. It means you have to retrain yourself throughout your life. The idea you go to college, you get a graduate degree, and that's the end of your studies. It's over. You'll have to take courses online. Otherwise, reinvent yourself, re-educate yourself throughout your life. And you might have to change many jobs. Your first job might be very different from the last one. Three, I would say, even if you're not in the business world, doing some economics and some finance is important. Understanding, because the world is driven by economics and money and finance and business. So being a bit clueless about it is a bit naive. You don't need to major in economics or finance, but having at least a basic economic literacy is important. Life is a marathon. Kids today think that unless they have a unicorn app by the age of 18, they are a failure. But I got my PhD in my late 20s, and then it took me 7 years to get tenure. And I was first an academic, then slowly a policymaker, and then I became more of a household name late in my 40s, where I became more well-known globally. So it's a marathon life. So you have to study one and be very good at one or two things. You cannot be spread too thin. Then you have to focus on one career initially, rather than, how to say, dabble in too many things. You have to work hard. If you get income, you should save, and save for the long run. And if you work hard and you generate income and you save for the long run and you reinvent yourself, you're going to do well in that life marathon. Today, a man or a woman born in a middle income, advanced economies has at birth a life expectancy of probably 100 years. And maybe 20 years from now, we'll all be able to live until 120. So you have to pace yourself and be able to ride the ups and downs over literally a century at this point. So it takes patience, focus, and of course, pursue your passions, but also know what you're good at, reinvent yourself, learn, be curious, and find new things, and be always interested in how the world is changing and how you can change that world.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. My last question for you today is more about what we discussed earlier about the tariffs and Trump, but in mega threats, you forecast 10 structural dangers facing the world over the next decade, one of them being deglobalization. With the sudden spike in tariffs and economic fragmentation, were you surprised? Did you see this coming after Trump was elected? Did you view it as inevitable? And do you have an optimistic outlook?
Yeah, in my book, I already had a full chapter about the risk of deglobalization, driven both by geopolitical depression and rivalry among great powers, by the fact that globalization led to winners and losers, and those who are left behind are revolting against free trade. And therefore, we already seen in the last few years a process of gradual deglobalization or de-risking or decoupling or globalization or slowbalization. It's not black and white. It's not like hyper-globalization or autarky. The world is in between, but there'll be some fragmentation. So what happened with Trump did not surprise me. I wrote extensively about it already in that book because those trends were already there. The silver lining, as I pointed out in many recent writing is one that he has to back down. I wrote and said market discipline, Fed independence, good advisors, and thin majority in Congress are going to box him in. The market will punish him if those things are crazy. The Fed is not going to cut rates. His advisors are going to tell him you're being stupid, and so on and so on. So I knew that he would start crazy, but then he'll be guarded by core forces. Point number one. And he did. He backed down now, and he wants to do trade deals with everybody, with Europe, stop threatening the Fed, and so on and so on. And secondly, as I pointed out, restriction to trade migration can reduce a little bit growth, but there are second order effects. First order effect, positive, is technology is going to increase potential growth, and US growth is going to go from 2 to 4, regardless of Trump, or regardless of whether it's Mickey Mouse in the White House. I do believe that you cannot stop technology. The dynamism of the private sector is such that it really doesn't matter who's in Washington. So tariff, migration restriction, other stupid policy can be noisy, but I think that historically technology is the biggest driver of changes in human growth, welfare, per capita income, longevity, and you name it. So from that point of view, I'm optimistic that technology will trump tariffs, and will trump bad policies.
Well, thank you so much for being here and sharing your thoughts, not only on a professional but personal level. And thank you for taking time out of your day to being a participant in this interview. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Great being with you. Good luck with your studies.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.